Just a reminder that you are listening to Radio Prague, the international service of Czech radio. Coming up next, Rolfing is an alternative form of medical treatment that has in recent years been introduced to the Czech Republic. The man who brought it here is Aleš Urbanczik, and he is Ian Willoughby's guest in this week's One-on-One.
Aleš Urbanczik is a practitioner and teacher of Rolfing, an alternative form of physiotherapy that also goes by the name structural integration. The one-time actor discovered the treatment in Switzerland, where he has lived for most of his life. But we spoke on one of Urbanczyk's monthly visits to his hometown of Prague, where he's been running Rolfing courses for over 2 years.
My family actually comes from a little town near Ostrava called Přibor. I think the hometown originally of Sigmund Freud, if I remember correctly. But I was born in Prague.
And your parents left here in 1968?
They actually left in 1963 to live in East Germany because my father was a specialist in tuberculosis and he got a better position in East Germany. And so we actually moved there until 1968. And in 1968, as Czech citizens, you were allowed to travel. So my family decided to spend the holidays in England for 3 weeks. And my mother worked there. She was a pediatrician. She worked there those 3 weeks in a hospital, replacing another doctor just to finance the whole thing. And we were supposed to fly back to Prague on the 21st of August, 1968. And of course we turned on the radio in the morning and saw what had happened in Prague. And my family decided within hours to stay in the United Kingdom.
My next question was going to be, why did they move to Switzerland? Is because they were German speakers?
They spoke German, but that was more because my mother actually got offered a job position there. And then we moved to Basel.
I've often got the impression that Switzerland is a relatively hard country to get a citizenship in, that they're not so welcoming to foreigners. But I guess if your mum was a doctor, then it must have been easier.
Well, 25% of the population of Switzerland are not native Swiss at this moment in time. I mean, this is quite a high percentage. I think it's one of the highest percentages in Europe. And Czech citizens in 1968, 69 were, I think, very welcome all over Europe, really. Especially because usually the people that left and emigrated in 68 were usually, lawyers, dentists, medical professionals of some sort. And it was not that we had a Swiss citizenship from the beginning. You have to live in Switzerland for 10 years and you have to live in the same place to apply for the citizenship, which we then did and we got.
And you yourself, you studied maths, I believe, but eventually dropped out and became an actor.
Yes, that's right. This was a tough decision because my parents actually left the Czech Republic not because of themselves. Of course they didn't like the political system, but they got by. They had good jobs. They were, within the hierarchy, they were pretty high. They had, well paid and all that. My parents left because of their children, because they wanted their children to, to have a better future.
Have opportunities.
Of course. But they didn't take into account that children sometimes decide by themselves at some point what they want to do. And so for my parents, it was clear that I would have to at least become a university professor, which for me was not necessarily the thing I wanted to do. But the pressure from home was so big that I decided to start studying at 18. And so I spent 4 years at the university studying math until I really decided until I was innerly strong enough to decide I really don't want to do this. And so just quit and did the thing that I at that time liked best, which was I applied for the acting school academy in Zurich, and they accepted me. And so.
And you were a theatre actor?
Yeah, stage.
Tell us, how did you discover Rolfing?
Rolfing. It's not Ralphing, by the way. It's
I'm trying to say Rolfing.
It's with an O. I had a bad injury to my knee playing football, and they had extracted a meniscus in my knee, and still years later my knee hurt. So for an actor on stage, this was terrible because my knee hurt all the time, and the medical professionals couldn't help me anymore. They wanted to do another surgery, but with the little expectations that they could solve the problem. And somebody decided I should see a Rolf, and I had never heard of it, but I said, might as well try, and he resolved the knee problem within 5 hours, within 5 sessions or something like that. And never would have thought something like this was possible just by pure manipulation.
And describe this manipulation. What exactly was he doing that solved your problem in 5 hours?
To be able to explain that, I have to go a little further back. You have to imagine how the body is built, how it's set up. You have a lot of bones within you, okay? They more or less stay the same unless you break one. But, your arm bone looks more or less the same like it looked a year ago and more or less the same like it looked another year. But around those bones, you've got like a three-dimensional webwork of mainly of connective tissue. And that, basically, the organization of that webwork defines the joints and the bones and their positions and their movements relative to each other. And that can change dramatically. For instance, if you have somebody who plays the violin professionally, then he will have a certain amount of rotation in one arm one way and in the other arm the other way, which will then twist his spine in a certain way, and one will over the years become higher than the other. So what a Rolfer does, he basically reorganizes that so that all that webwork is closer where it's supposed to be, thus allowing the bones and the joints to also become closer to where they're supposed to be and taking up more appropriate function again.
And gravity is also involved.
Well, gravity is involved in the sense that if you're not in a certain amount of alignment, what will happen is that your head will get pushed in space forward. Your head can never go too far back. It will always compensate by going forward. Now, your head weighs about 7 kilos. Now, then gravity takes over, and there is a set of compensations that start throughout the whole body, all the way into the feet, to balance that anterior weight of 7 kilos, hanging in the middle of nowhere so that it doesn't basically fall to the ground. And then a vicious circle starts, muscles start tightening up, other structures start to compensate, and this is what a Rolfer does. He basically reorganizes the whole body so that that head ultimately can come further back, and gravity feels like it is actually supporting you and not tearing you down. That's what usually is the feeling after the basic series of 10 Rolfing sessions.
Are most people simply holding themselves wrong when they're walking or standing or sitting?
Holding is a difficult word because it implies that you would be able to hold yourselves differently if you only tightened other muscles.
Well, many people, for example, have bad posture. You can just see it.
Well,
they don't stand straight.
Exactly. But they can't correct it themselves because the effort is too big and the amount of attention that would be needed is just too great. So if you don't work with a manipulative strategy where you just reorganize the connective tissue and then start having them consciously change that, you're not going to have much success.
I had never heard of Rolfing until I read an interview with you, and I was wondering after I read it, it sounded so interesting, why isn't it better known?
Well, I think one of the reasons is because the initial approach, the idea that Rolfing has, is not so easy to get across. Because our main aim is to organize something and not to fix something. So even if somebody comes, usually people come because they hurt somewhere. They have back pain, they have elbow pain, they have whatever. The less I concentrate on their pain, the more I concentrate on reorganizing the structure, the better result it's going to be at the end. Now, this idea that you have to work on your feet to solve a problem in the elbow on the other side is difficult to get across at first. Okay, the second reason why Rolfing has not been more in the public interest is that the territory which we work in is connective tissue, is fascia. And fascia was until about 5 or 6 years ago regarded by the medical community as mere filling material with no function other than like you put bubble wrap in a package so that the things don't collide with each other. A Rolfer named Robert Schleip in Germany about 10 years ago did a doctoral thesis, and he actually built a lab where he put fascial tissue. He did this in his own kitchen at home. This was his project, like a real pioneer. And he proved that fascia does not only contract and relax independently of muscles, that there's an innovation within the fascial system which has not been known about in the medical community. But he also proved that it contracts as a reaction to stress hormones. which, of course, I mean, that's a radical new view in the medical community. So far, psychological factors for illnesses and stuff like that have been kind of neglected and left to the alternative therapies and maybe to esoterics and stuff. But this is really, somebody could prove that tissue basically shrinks as a result of stress. This was radical. So now in the last 5 or 6 years, due to the Robert Schleip's work, this has become much more, common to talk about this, at least in Western Europe, in Germany. Czech Republic is slowly catching on there.
Did you introduce Rolfing in the Czech Republic?
I'm not quite sure, but I was probably the first one that started working here. And I am certainly by far the most experienced Rolfer that can actually reasonably well speak Czech. So,
and do you have to, in some sense, prove to the medical authorities that what you're doing isn't dangerous, or do you need any kind of certification or something like that?
Well, we have founded an organization here, the Czech Association for Structural Integration. Structural integration is the original word for Rolfing. And we actually train people. At the moment, the situation in the Czech Republic is, of course, still that they need like a massage diploma first, and they basically have their, what you call in the Czech Republic, živnost, through their massage therapy or physiotherapy and their business license through that. But what they do is Rolfing. In other countries, it's a little, in Switzerland, for instance, becoming a profession. So this will take some time.
Aleš Urbanczik talking there to my colleague Ian Willoughby, and that edition of One on One brings us to the end of our English language broadcast. If you have any comments about today's program, then please send them to us. You can contact us by email at english@radio.cz or on Facebook and Twitter. We'll be glad to hear from you. But that's all for now from me, Ruth Fraňková. Thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye.